All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome to today's session of Basic Hebrew on this 12th day of March 2023. When we met last time, we were taking a look at Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9, and we had gotten down to about verse 7. And so we were here then where the Lord says, "Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. So that then is the English text, just to orient us. And then let's come back on down here into the Hebrew text. And so we had gotten down through, down to the relative clause here. But so we had this idea of hava, which is going to be the imperative there, having that idea of to give. And then ne reva, we will go down. And then we also had winavala, sham, sifatham. And we will mix there the lip of them. And we had discussed that idea of balal, which is in fact the word that we have right here. So that word balal, which I have written off to the side here, having that idea of to mix. And basically what that indicates is that the Lord took the component parts of Adam's language, all of the sounds, all of the parts of the words, the rules governing their order, and he changed their relationships one to another. And in so doing, that was how he brought into existence all of the languages that then emerged out from Babel and caused the people to divide from one another and to disperse throughout the earth. And then we have down here this relative clause, which is going to give basically the extent of the nature of the mixing. So you have here, first of all, the word asher, and that is going to be the relative pronoun, emphasizing that relative, introducing that relative clause, which is going to be describing that idea of sifatham. So which, lo, there's the negative adverb, that idea of not. And then we have this word here, yishmeu. And notice on the front of this, you have the yod right there. And that yod is going to be one of the imperfect performatives. We have discussed that we have in Hebrew two different aspects, one of which being the perfect aspect, which demonstrates completed action. And then we also have the imperfect aspect, which indicates incomplete action. So action that is not yet completed. When we're dealing with an imperfect verb, that idea of incomplete action, we can tell that we're dealing with an imperfect verb because of the fact that those imperfect verbs are going to have one of the four imperfect performatives on the front of it. Those imperfect performatives being what I have written off to the side here, aleph, yod, tau, and nun, where the aleph is going to indicate that the subject of the verb is first common singular. The nun indicates that the verb is going to be first common plural. The yod, that it is either third masculine singular or plural. And then the tau, everything else, which would be basically be second masculine singular and plural, second feminine singular and plural, and third feminine singular and plural. In this particular instance, we have the yod, which would indicate third masculine. Now, to tell if this is going to be singular or plural, I look to the end following the triliteral root to see if there is a U-class vowel, that is either the kibbutz or the shurik. In this particular instance, we do in fact have a shurik here, so we have a U-class vowel, so thus this is going to be plural. So, thus, in other words, this here indicates that this is going to be third masculine. This over here, that shurik, indicates that it is plural. And then the triliteral root here, the shin, mem, ayin, from the verb shamah, meaning to hear. And so, thus, we would translate this as they will hear. Then, next we have the word ish, which is going to be the word man. And then we have shafaf. So this word here is the very same word that we had up above here on sifatham. So this word here, sifat, is again going to be a noun, and it is in fact a feminine singular construct here. And so lipav, and then re'ehu is going to be in the it's going to function here as well. So notice here you have the word Rhea, which is basically going to be that idea of a friend here. And then that Ahu is going to be the third masculine singular pronominal suffix. And so thus I would then have friend of, the pronominal suffix makes the word friend definite. So I have the friend of him. And then the friend of him in turn makes lip definite as well, the lip of the friend of him. In other words, what we have here, the extent of this mixing which the Lord did. So the mixing of the components of the language of Adam was done to the extent that one person would not be able to understand what another person was saying to him. And as a result, then they would divide from one another and disperse throughout the earth. And the result is of that mixing is discussed here as we get into verse 8. So, Wayafet, Yihya, Otham, Misham. And so right on the front of this here, that wow with the pathak followed by the dagesh forte. So I know that that is going to be the form that the wow consecutive takes on an imperfect, which means that the letter in which the dagesh forte appears is going to be the imperfect preformative. In this particular instance, the yod there. And that yod again, as you can see when we come on up here to our 4 imperfect preformatives, is going to be third masculine. No U-class vowel at the end, so this is again going to be third masculine singular. And it comes from the verb, this word here, poots. And the word poots basically has the idea of to scatter. So this particular word here is going to be that cal imperfect third masculine singular of the verb poots. And so we would say, then he scattered. Well, who did the scattering? Remember that Hebrew is what we call a verb subject object language. That means then that the verb has a tendency to occur first and the subject is going to occur next. So the one who did the scattering then is here, Yihya. So Yihya scattered, and then I would anticipate seeing the object, and that is in fact what we have here, Otham. You will notice right here, this word, that oath, this is the form that the definite object marker has a tendency to take when it is taking a pronominal suffix. So the pronominal, so the definite object marker usually is this form here, indicating that what follows is going to be the object of the verb and that that object is definite. But when it takes the pronominal suffix, then it changes form from that eighth to that oath. but it's still the definite object marker. And then this there, that is going to be my pronominal suffix, and it is third masculine plural. So then Yahya scattered them, misham. This particular word consists of two parts. I can see the mem on the front of it. I can also see the dagesh forte inside of the sheen. That lets me know that something has assimilated, and the letter in Hebrew that has the tendency to assimilate the most is the noon. So what happened here? I had the word sham, which is basically going to be the idea of there, an adverb of place. And then we put the men preposition on the front of it. But this noon is closing the syllable introduced by that mem, and it's therefore vowelless, which means that that vowelless noon is going to assimilate, and a dagesh forte compensative is going to be placed in the following letter. And so thus those are the two parts there. You have the men preposition from, and then the adverb sham there. So from there. So again, what we have in this particular instance, following that normal pattern that we had, here's our verb, then scattered. So then Yahya scattered. Who did he scatter? He scattered them, referring back to the individuals who were building the city. And then you have this prepositional phrase, which is going to be adverbially modifying the verb there. So then Yahya scattered them from there by mixing their language. And then where did he scatter them to? Well, that's where we come to this here. So al panei kol haaretz. Al being that preposition upon, and then you have panei. And so again, this comes from the word pane, but it is here in its construct form. You can tell that by that seire yod ending. So this is going to be that masculine plural construct, meaning that this particular noun is going to be modified by another noun. So we would say faces of. And then you come to this word here, kol. Well, again, that particular word is going to be the construct of this word here, kol. And so it's in the construct as well, having that idea of entirety. So we have faces of, entirety of, haaretz. Well, right on the front of this, I can see that I have the hey with the pathak followed by the dagesh forte, except for the fact that the dagesh forte is inside of one of the gutturals. Those gutturals being aleph, hey, hey, ayin. And so as a result, because of the fact that the gutturals cannot take the dagesh forte, the guttural is going to reject the dagesh forte, and the preceding vowel is going to lengthen in this instance to the kamates. And it is on the word eretz. So normally we would see the pointing of this word as follows. So you have eretz pointed with two segels here. But because of the fact that the article is on the front of it, as well as the fact that it is in pause here due to the presence of, remember what we call that particular accent there? The athnok, indicating the logical middle of the verse. So both under the influence of the article and under the influence of that athnok, which means it's going to be in pausal form, and thus the syllable is going to lengthen a little bit there. The segol that was underneath the aleph lengthens to that kamates, and that's how we get this form, haaretz. And because of the fact that haaretz is definite, that also makes its construct noun, kol, definite, which also makes faces definite as well. So upon the faces of the entirety of the earth. And so as a result, then that tells us he's scattering them from that valley there in Shinar upon the entirety of the faces of the earth. Now, we come on down here to the next word, and we have Wayahdelu. So notice here, on the front again, I have that wow with the pathak followed by the Dagesh forte. And so that again is going to be the form that the wow consecutive takes on an imperfect. It also means that the Dagesh forte of the wow consecutive is going to occur inside of the imperfect preformative. So thus my yod again is the imperfect preformative here. And remember those four imperfect preformatives. We have the aleph, the yod, the tau, and the noon. And so our imperfect preformative here is the noon, third masculine, singular, or plural. So the yod tells me it's third masculine. I look to the end to see if there is a U class vowel. We do in fact have a U class vowel, so I know this is going to be third masculine plural. Now, there's another thing as well to note as we are dealing with this particular form. Normally, what we see is the imperfect preformatives, depending on the stem that we are dealing with, are going to have a specific pointing. So, for instance, the cow imperfect preformative is going to be pointed with a hiric. The nifal as well is going to be pointed with a hiric. The piel and the pual as well, those are going to be pointed with schwas. Then you come to the hifil, and there the imperfect preformative is going to be pointed with a pathak. The hofal, the imperfect preformative, will be pointed either with a kametz hatuf or with a kibbutz. And then you also have the hifpael form as well, which is basically going to be the performative plus tau. But here, notice here, my imperfect performative in this instance is pointed with the pathak. So I would normally anticipate, this must be a hifil. But there's no other indication of this being hifil. And I think someone's mic may be.
I was saying something. I need to mute my mic. I need to mute my mic so I can talk.
All right. All right. So we see then that the imperfect performative here has the pathak. And so we would think, this must be a hifil, causative action. But the issue is there are no other indications of this being a hifil. And then notice as well, the letter that follows the yod here is in fact a cheth. And the cheth has a tendency to prefer pathaks before and underneath them. So what we have in this instance, that pathak underneath the yod, this is not indicative of this word being in the hifil stem. Rather, it is just there underneath the influence of that cheth. This is in fact still a cal basic action. So what we have in this particular instance then, this is going to be a cal. It is going to be imperfect. It is third masculine plural. And notice the triliteral root there in the middle, the cheth, daleth, lameth. So the verb chadal, which has the idea of to cease. So again, and remember as well, it is imperfect, but that wow consecutive is going to flip the aspect here. And so as a result, changing it from incomplete action to complete. So thus we would have then they ceased, And then what is it that they ceased? Well, we come on down here. Livenoth ha'ir. Livenoth here again consists of two parts. We have the Lamed preposition on the front of it, and then we have benoth. Now, benoth, this is going to be the cal infinitive construct of the verb bana. So you have the verb bana, which is the idea of to build. But then when it goes to that idea of the infinitive construct, so basically a verbal form that is serving as a noun, then the pointing of the verb changes to simple vocal schwa underneath the first letter, followed by a holum following the second. And then because our triliteral root ends with a hey, and this is going to be an infinitive construct, that hey changes to a tau in order to make it easier to pronounce the construct noun with its absolute. And that's how we get this form, benoth there. Now I'm going to put the Lamed preposition on the front of it as well. Well, the Lamed preposition is normally pointed with a simple vocal schwa. As a result, I now have two vocal schwas side by side, something which is an impossibility in Hebrew. And so as a result, then the first one is going to lengthen to the nearest short vowel in pronunciation, which in the case of a Hickory is going to be, in the case of a vocal schwa, is going to be a Hickory. And so thus we have then livnoth, and that's the form that we have here. So to building of, and what is it that is serving as the absolute? Well, here we have ha'ir. Again, I can see hey with the pathak followed by a dagesh forte, but the dagesh forte is going to go inside of the guttural. Remember, our four gutturals are aleph, hey, cheth, and ayin, which is the guttural we have in this particular instance. And that guttural is therefore going to reject the dagesh forte, and the preceding vowel lengthens to the kamates. So this here is the article on the noun ear, city. So the city. So the city serving as the absolute of livnoth makes but livnoth also definite as well. So to the building of the city. Now, another thing to remember when we're dealing with infinitives construct. These infinitives construct, when they have that preposition, so the preposition will determine how that particular infinitive construct is functioning. Typically, when we have a baith preposition on the front of an infinitive construct, that baith having the idea of location, thus what it's saying is something else happened in the time when another action was taking place. And so thus that's going to be a temporal idea. The Lamed preposition has a tendency to indicate direction and thus also purpose. And then you have the kaf preposition, which is going to be that idea of comparison and thus has a tendency to indicate manner as well. So what we have here with this idea of livnoth, that idea of direction, purpose. So when the Lord mixed their language so that they could no longer understand one another, as a result, then they ceased their purpose of building the city. And so thus that was no longer occurring. Right? Then we can come on down a little bit further here. And we have al-kain. So al is going to be the preposition upon again. Kain is the idea of thus. So upon thus. So the thus referring to everything that followed, especially the mixing of the language. So upon thus, everything that occurred previously here. This is why we have that particular name for the city. So Kara. Notice here the word Kara. This is going to be that Cal perfect third masculine singular. So he called Shem'ah, and you can see the word shame. So this word here, shame, in its construct form. And shame is the idea of a name. And then the ah at the end here, that's going to be that third feminine singular pronominal suffix. So he called the name of her, and then the name was Bavel. This particular word is, and the name of the city, it is related directly to the action which the Lord took up here, this idea of Balal. Let me show you what I mean. So you take the word Balal, which is the idea of to mix. And Hebrew, like other languages, one of the ways that they will intensify something is by repeating it. And so as a result, what can happen then is you can actually take the word and double it. And it's not at all unusual when you are dealing with a word where the last two consonants are the same for those two consonants to coalesce, like what has happened here. And so thus you would have then that idea of bow, referring to an intensive mixing. So that idea of bao, an intensive mixing. But when that occurs, then this lameth here is actually vowelless, and vowelless lameths, like nuns, sometimes assimilate. So it would not be unusual for that to assimilate. And as a result, then the name then becomes Bavel, like what we have here in our particular form. And so that is, in fact, what has happened. There was one place that I have come across that actually references the fact that the name of Bavel was, in fact, originally this idea of Bil Baal. And you can see very closely that related then how it related to that idea of Bao, which I was saying earlier. So Bilbaal, and thus leading to Bavel. And I need to find that source again. But that is, in fact, how that particular form arose. So the name of the city is, in fact, a reference back to the mixing of the language which was accomplished there. You will come across sources that will say, well, Bavel just means the gate of God. No, the scripture is very plain. The name arose from the name of the action which the Lord performed there. So upon thus, he called the name of her, that is, that idea of the city, Bavel. And then here you have again, why is it that the name of the city was called Bavel? Ki, because. Sham, there's that word for there again. Balal, there's the word for to mix. So he mixed. Who mixed? Yahya. So because there, Yahya mixed. Sephath, and you can see the word for lip in its construct form again. Lip of, kol, the entirety of, haaretz, the earth. So, in other words, this right here, that key is giving us the ground or the reason for why the name of the city was called Bavel. It was called Bavel because there the mixing of language occurred. And then as well, you have here next Umisham. Hefitsam Yihya al Pnei Kol Haaretz. Notice here with our very first word, umisham, you can see the conjunction. That is the form that the conjunction takes before a labial. That is before a consonant that is pronounced with the lips, like the beit, the mem, and the pei. Then again, you can see the mem followed by that dagesh forte. So thus we have that men preposition where the vowel noon assimilated. And then sham is going to be that adverb of place. So, and from there, and then you have hefitsam. And you can see in this particular word the same triliteral root that we saw earlier, that idea of poots, except it's in a different form here. Notice the hirik yod and the hey on the front of it. Both of those, that hey and that hirik yod, have a tendency to indicate the hiphil stem, thus causative action. So thus, this is going to be that idea of he caused scattering. And who is it that he caused scattering? Well, the here, that is going to be indicative of the third masculine plural pronominal suffix. He caused scattering them. Who? Yihya. So Yihya caused them to scatter. And then where did he scatter them? Al Panei Kol Haaretz. And there's al, that preposition upon again. Panei, again, that construct form of pana, having that idea of faces. So faces of. Kol, there's the construct of kol entirety. And then haaretz. And again, notice here, hey with the pathak followed by the dagesh forte. The guttural rejects the dagesh forte, and the preceding vowel lengthens on the word eretz, earth. And earth being definite makes kol definite, which also makes faces of definite as well. And so, and from there, Yihya caused scattering of them upon the faces of the entirety of the earth. And so that is how then the various languages that we now have in the world came into existence. That is not to say that every single language that we have was one of the primary languages that emerged from Babel. What happens is, so here you have the original language, the language of Adam. So I'm going to go ahead and call that Adamite here. So you have Adamite, and then Adamite was mixed by the Lord to bring into existence all of these other languages, these primary languages. And I'm going to go ahead and call these, we'll call this mixed language 1, mixed language 2, mixed language 3, and then also we'll say mixed language 4. There were probably about 70 of these. But then as the people groups moved, then you have another group that would separate from mixed language 1, and they would form their own dialect of that. And perhaps another dialect over here, another dialect over here, and then you've got another branching off as well, and so forth. And that is then, so in other words, there was this initial mixing, and then as the people continued to disperse, that mixing continued. And that is then how we arrived at all of the different languages, thousands of languages that we now have in the world today. But anything else that we need to add there, sir? Oh, your mic is muted.
Turned on the camera, but not the mic. No, I think it's important for each of us to recognize that God did not have to create 6,000 or 8,000 languages at Babel to mimic what we see around us in the world right now. I've forgotten what the number is, but I think the number's somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 languages that we think exist.
Mm-hmm.
But it would not take, with all of the effects of violation and the destroyed relationships among people. We can even look at it nowadays, and there's sometimes brothers who hate one another and can't wait to get away from one another, or sisters, or things like that, families. And so one will actually move away from the others. And then it is but a very short step for if you will, a new language to develop. Because those people, when they move away, there's not just an alienation in heart, there's an alienation from the entire culture that they left. And that culture is, Becca, is language not an aspect of that culture?
Very fundamentally.
Very fundamentally. And so these people would be oriented to doing things their own way, so that they were not mimicking where they had left. And this would be a constant thing. And, we look at it now, we say, oh, wow, there are probably only about 100 generations between, creation and here. And because there were 10 generations up to Noah. Noah was the 10th, and he lived 930 years, even 350 years after the flood. Shem was the 11th, and he lived for 502 years after the flood. And you think about this, and then you had all these other people, and as they're going away, and especially the descendants of Ham, but not only the descendants of Ham, were spreading out, and then they're seeking ways of expressing what they are experiencing. And that experience would be, part of that would be the alienation that they would have from other people groups. And Hamites would sometimes be at odds with other Hamites, and many, many, many times around the world, that's exactly what we see. But Hamites also at odds with Japhethites and Shemites and everything like. And so and Japhethites were at odds with Shemites, and so forth and so forth. It would not take long to change. Wow.
I mean, look at how much English has changed just from 1611.
Mm-hmm. And that's a good question. Why do we not speak good, shall we say, King James English? And this has been 400 years, but we still think we're English speaking people. But that's why I say we don't speak English, we speak American, because we're weird according to the English. But it was always fun to tease with my dear brother from England up at Tabernacle. But you look at this, and in a sense, you can't not imagine how all of these languages could have developed from an original about 70. We're now 4,000, probably roughly 4,300 years later, somewhere around that. And in 4,300 years, that's let's see, in 4,000 years, if each generation was about 40 years, if it was about 30 years, then you'd be looking at 140 generations, something like that, if that was exactly the way they went. And they haven't been exactly 30 or 40. If they were 40 years, well, we would have, 4,000 years, we'd have about 100 generations. But there haven't been that many generations. But with them spreading the effects of the alienation that they had, because what gets me and makes me think about this is we talk about sin and the effects of sin. Well, what are the effects of sin? Does sin, shall we say, does sin make you love your brother? No. And the answer is no, it doesn't. It actually makes you feel alienated from your brother. So, and that alienation and its effects, I mean, you don't want to do it their way. You don't want to speak their way. You don't want to do anything their way. You want to do your own thing. In other words, you know what it almost sounds like, Becca? That humans wanted to define and determine good and evil for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I heard that somewhere before. I'm not sure where it is, but I think a man even before Noah said something like that. He may not have said the words, but he said it in his heart. So, and it was not just the word of Satan. It was not just the word of the serpent, because if the man and the woman had not wanted to do that themselves and thought they possessed that authority, they would never have listened to the serpent. The serpent was there before they ever came to that point. And I'm sure he was not any different. Makes you wonder if there might have even been other temptations that occurred, but that were totally rejected. Can't say whether there were or not. The only one that matters is the one that Eve partook of, and the one that Adam said, yeah, I want to do that. I don't care whether you think I should or not. I'm going to do it. I have the authority. I am the head of creation. And we still think we're the head. So anyway, the only thing I would change about your diagram is maybe make the legs out of the mixed languages, make them a little bit longer, about 20 more on each. No, you don't have to. Because they sure have. I think about, we talk to the Kenyans,
Mm-hmm.
and we speak to the Kenyans in English because the English had that effect there. But the Kenyans also have Swahili that they speak, but they all also have tribal languages. Now, think about this. Tribal languages. These are people who are adjacent to one another, but would not speak the same language unless they had some reason to do so. Like you've said before, when we talked about why would languages change, the one language before Babel, why did it never change? Well, there was never any reason to change because no one else spoke a different language. But these people have different tribal languages. That it's incredible how different they can be. I mean, like Peter, he speaks not only Swahili and Bukusu, and then you got the guys a few miles away and they speak something else. And then you go across the border into Uganda and they speak something else. And they don't all speak the same thing. They just have a language. They have a lingua franca to use for a wide range of interpersonal communications, but they also have their personal tribal languages that have come down for centuries. It just, language did evolve, Becca. Is that a fair statement?
Properly defined.
Would you care to define what I mean by that?
Yes. So
have languages evolved?
Yes. No.
Okay.
So
would you care to explain me and you?
Yes, absolutely. So languages have evolved, but not in the sense that the evolutionary scientists will say. The evolutionary scientists will say that language evolved over the course of millions of years and changed, basically became many on its own accord. But what we see here is that there was one language which existed from the beginning of human existence. That language continued until an external agent acted upon it to bring into existence multiple other languages. And then once that happened, then the process of language change began. And that's where we developed all of these different dialects, etc. Because as you have the mixed language two over here interacting with this dialect over here, well, then there's going to be a little bit of a crossing between those two. And that's how you end up with these transitional dialects as well. They separate from one another. The language becomes adapted to their own experiences and their own needs and their own preferences as well. And so the languages change in that respect. And so it was like the Lord started the process of mixing, and the domino effect has just been continuing on since then.
So also, how many of these mixed languages from Babel, how many of them are alphabetic? How many of all of these languages that exist upon the earth, which are not derived from Hebrew directly or indirectly through time, I'm talking about that. How many other languages on earth are alphabetic?
No.
None of them. Now listen, folks. Do you realize what we're saying? We have languages that are alphabetic, but every alphabetic language on the entire earth is derived from the original alphabet that God built into Adam, and which was born through the flood by Noah. And then the other languages that came into existence, that God brought into existence perfectly to cause the dispersion of people at the Babel rebellion, because the rebellion was, they said, no, we're not going to disperse. We're going to stay right here. We're not going to disperse. And that was their rebellion, and the languages were designed to make them disperse upon the face of the whole earth. And that's what happened. But all of those languages were non-alphabetic. And that means they were going to go through a period of time. And as we've talked about before, and Becca, you and I have talked about this so many times, and just tried to point this out to people, to begin to build a pictographic language, if you did not have an alphabet, you had nothing but a spoken language, an oral language, oral communications. But it would probably take no more than a few months, depending on conditions, your actual conditions, and everything where you were, but it would probably take no more than a few months to begin to build a reasonably good pictographic language. And now you look at the world, and every language outside of the alphabetic languages, every one of which is derived from that original language, they're all non-alphabetic languages. You do not go into any of these tribal nations. You don't go into the tribal languages of wherever you are and find an alphabetic language that was original. The only way that they have an alphabetic language, even if they had something, say the Kenyans with Bukusu, to have Bukusu to be alphabetic, Bukusu has to be converted to an alphabet. Somebody goes in and takes this oral language and the sounds, the consonants and vowels and everything, and they reduce those to an alphabetic structure that can then be used to represent the language. But until those languages come into contact with alphabetic language, they don't change. They may split, and they may make another non-alphabetic language. They may combine and make another non-alphabetic language, but they don't go to alphabetic. And yet the world is saying The world is saying, oh, no, no, no. Yes, everything started with these non-alphabetic languages and cuneiform and the Egyptian hieroglyphs and all of that. And they make up this stupidity, absolute stupidity, anti-God stupidity that says, well, you know, Aleph, it was originally the shape of an ox head or a bull's head or something like that. And then the base, well, that was the word, that was house. So it had a picture. And then they try to go through, they don't even have something to represent all 22 characters, but it doesn't work. It's nonsense. And the sad thing is that's the predominant expression of how Hebrew came into existence, which is around the world. The internet is filled with that stupidity. And believers are filled with that stupidity because they never learned what the scriptures actually said and how languages actually developed and what actually happened at Babel. That's the problem. We haven't even tried to learn. How many of us? I was in seminary 6 years. How much time did I actually spend in seminary trying to evaluate what God actually did at Babel? How many times did I actually get into the idea that there was only one language, but did I think about that language had to originate with God? It had to have been built into Adam by God. Do you know what? We didn't cover that kind of thing. And I've never heard a preacher do that. I don't know where we've been. And yet we consider ourselves to be people of the faith. What faith? Earthly faith or God faith? And that's what we've been doing. And we satisfy ourselves with, oh, yes. Oh, well, yes, we're going to have a worship service on Sunday morning. Oh, baloney. Don't give me that stuff. When you worship, you seek God as he has revealed himself. And if you don't seek God as he has revealed himself, then you are not worshiping him. You are not submitting yourself to his design. You're actually rejecting. But that's what's happening. And, you know, this kind of thing. So what I'm recommending to you, and I'm going to say it this way. If you don't care, your walk with God is not accurate. I'm going to say that flat out. If you don't care and you don't think it's important that you develop a handle on some of the stuff that she had just been sharing with you, especially about the nature of what happened at Babel. If you don't care about getting that right, then you're saying to God, what you said about Babel does not matter. And that means you have become a judge of the criteria of God and not a hearer of the criteria of God. And that is the antithesis of belief. See, this is the thing. And somebody's got to start waking up and preaching and teaching people that these things, this is not just information and I can accept it or reject it. This is either the truth of God or it's a lie. Plain and simple. It's either the truth of God or it's a lie. And if it's a lie, hey, we all need to go out and get us jobs. I'll go start selling insurance. Well, maybe not. I'll go work for Walmart to be a greeter or something like that. But if it's a truth, then every person who hears that truth needs to take it to heart and seek to understand it to the degree that they can then mimic that truth and represent it accurately to everyone else. And that's what's not happening in our churches. It is not happening. Before we go to the other thing.
Yes, sir. What do you need?
Keep where you are. Stay where you are. I just got a letter today from a missionary who is wanting help. And I had sent him a letter Wonder if I could find that, El.
What do you want? Yes.
The letter I sent to.
Yes, again.
Let me see.
I know right
Oh,
where
give
it
me
is.
just a minute.
I know right where it is.
Okay.
Do you want this on the recording, sir?
I'm debating that.
Okay.
Uh,
No names used, of course.
yeah, let's leave it on the recording. We're
Okay.
starting the Bible study early, okay?
All right. Yes, sir.
But
Here.
Becca, what is the difference between a Bible study and a study of Hebrew biblically?
It's all one.
They're just different aspects of all one and the same truth.
Mhm.
And we have separated them. So if we've separated them, where in the world, where's the mind of those people in our Bible colleges and seminaries who have allowed this separation to occur? And I can tell you where it is. It's called humanism. And we are in the midst of it. I probably won't put my tie on, hon.
Okay.
So I wrote to this missionary. So I wrote to this missionary. He's wanting to work with us in our college and seminary at Tabernacle. And what?
Sponsorship.
Yeah, he's wanting us to sponsor him, but now he's wanting more than that. So he was. This is something I wrote to him. I told him, because he's familiar with Tabernacle Baptist Bible College and Seminary. So it said, you may be interested to know, and by the way, I am still the dean of Tabernacle Baptist Bible College and Seminary. And Rebecca is still an instructor there as well. She's a very minor instructor, but she is still an instructor. So, or maybe she might be a little more important than that.
Do you need the other letter? It's above there.
So what?
Do you need to see the other letter? What he wrote? It's above
I
there.
got it there. So,
No, the first one.
oh, okay. So anyway, this is what I said to him. I said, you may be interested to know that since my coming to TBBCS in 2005 and seeing the weaknesses and superficialities then existing in the school's programs, we have worked to move and continue moving from what I would call a traditionalist school to one that seeks to develop in each student a true and accurate relationship with God. One that begins with learning to know and understand him as he has actually revealed himself. Thus, we focus on student learning, which begins where God began, in his Hebrew scriptures and beginning with Genesis. We no longer teach the standard systematic theologies, quote unquote, which almost all of us learned in our studies. Instead, we focus on our own, and that's important, biblical theology materials, and that's what we are developing. Not as almost all of us learned biblical theology, and I did in seminary, but with new foci, his person and nature, his design, his relationship to all that exists, and then in paren, not the least of which is his revelation, the significance of his name as he revealed it to Moses, etc., etc., etc. In a sense, since everything that exists is a revelation of the person and nature of God, we have come to realize that all of our teaching must be theological in nature and accurate. We no longer teach the typical pastoral theologies that we all learned. Instead, we teach biblical leadership theology, what might be more accurately called biblical shepherding, which is designed to help every believer to see his or her responsibility in their every interpersonal relationship. We have also added a very important and valuable course called Man-Woman, God's Perfect Design, a course which begins with the perspective that the man-woman relationship is a primary aspect of God's perfect design. We have done much more, seeking to make the content of our degrees more effective, both in the lives of students and in all that our students touch. And let's see here. We are seeking to give every student, I skipped a piece there. We are seeking to give every student that personal foundation with the Creator, which changes their thinking, indeed their lives, into that more accurate, full knowledge and understanding. And by the way, there is such a thing as full knowledge. And if you read the scriptures as God wrote them in Greek, you find that it's epignosis. It's not just gnosis. So that full knowledge and understanding, which enables each of them to more accurately interact with every person and situation of life. In a sense, we are now training true biblical counselors in every course, and we are seeing the fruit in their lives. And so, and I don't know what else did I say here. I told him, I said, I realize that you may not perceive the true and full significance of the changes in our curriculum. You and I may have come from much the same educational background, but I have committed my life to correcting some of those aspects of the typical, quote, biblical education, unquote, which have long needed changing. We are not becoming conformed to the contemporary perspectives now pervading much of biblical education. We focus much on biblical language studies, but not as an end. It's not just to learn Greek or Hebrew, and that's what's happening in our schools. It's not an end. They are rather effective and irreplaceable tools for perceiving in the scriptures what God actually intended humans to know. And we will be working to that end until our last breath. We would be glad to send you some of the materials we have developed, and you are free to use them there as you see fit. If they are good, they are his. If they are not good, then they are probably mine. Though some of those might be Rebecca's and some other people we know. And I said, if you wish to characterize me, you may say that I seek to be a pure biblicist. That is, one who seeks to know God as he has revealed himself in the Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic languages, which he chose for his revelation. So, and I ended it with my typical closing. May the Lord, the God who exists, bless you with an inescapable sense of the wisdom he has placed within your grasp. Oh, go over here. Now, so not knowing what I would get back from this man, and I won't put it on the screen because his name's on here now, but he is in another country, and you'll probably see that as we go down through. And he starts off and he says, "Dear Brother Sheets," and he said, "Wow," in all capital letters, double wow, all capital letters, triple wow, all capital letters. And he says, "If I was excited by the first couple lines of your email, I was overwhelmed with the rest of it. Amen to your focus on God and the personal foundation of the Creator. Amen to correcting common biblical education. And amen to being a biblical purist. I felt a fresh breeze flowing through my room and into my heart. All these things I too see and desire for my students. I truly sense a kindred spirit in you, my brother, and would delight in sharing coffee and sharing our hearts and visions." Now, I don't know how we're going to share coffee. We're only about 12,000 miles apart, but other than
have
that,
to do a
easy.
video conference and both of you having coffee on either side.
Yeah. So he says, "I am attaching a copy of Philosophy of Bible College Education, which I wrote for my advisory board." He forgot to attach it too, I think. But that's normal for us. "To acquaint them with the foundations of my approach in establishing a school. It will help you to understand some of my thinking." And he says, "But back to the first wow. I cannot express to you what TBBCS's endorsement and partnership means to me. I've been closely involved with 3 Bible colleges." Listen to this now. This is an older man. He's my age anyway, or close to it.
He is your age.
And so he says, "Since my arrival in the Philippines, and have been forced to break from all 3 for moral and ethical failures that I observed. It's a long story, better suited for our coffee sharing time. But suffice it to say, partnership with TBBCS will go far in raising the educational standards and objectives for Christian leaders here. Listen to this. There are over 5,000 independent Baptist churches here and innumerable church Bible colleges and institutes. But listen to this. But they reflect a shocking shallowness of biblical education beyond soul winning and church planting. That's what it's going to be, soul winning and church planning. So you win souls, but they can't grow in God because you don't know God accurately. You plant a church and you have people listening to you, but you don't know God and you can't represent him accurately. Degree mills proliferate, as do bogus pastoral degrees, with an excuse of, that's just the way it is here. That's what the people do. I am happy. I think we got a little bit of that in another country too, Becca. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
I am happy to focus on teaching leaders at the graduate level rather than the undergraduate level because they have been in the trenches. And that's what we do. Say, well, this guy's he's been a missionary or he's been a pastor for 40 years, so therefore he's qualified to teach. And I say, no. And if you want him to teach at TBBCS and he's not already grandfathered in, guess what? I don't want him. And if you want him to teach, then you don't want me, because we're not going to get along with that. He will change or he will not teach. I am happy to focus on teaching leaders at the graduate level rather than the undergraduate level because they have been in the trenches and see the need for more. So think about this. They see the need, people see the need, and he does, for more than a piece of paper to wave at a roaring lion. So we give them this little paper. See, oh, I graduated from Bible college, or I went to this, I did this. And the roaring lion goes about seeking whom he may devour. And we wave the little piece of paper and we don't even know God. He says the good news is that there are many sincere and hungry Christian leaders who have a desire to learn how to better please God and serve him. I desire the same for myself, especially in committing to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. To that end, yes, please send any and all materials you may have which would help. If possible, could you send a generous supply of school catalogs so that I can encourage Filipinos in the quality of the seminary we are partnering with, and to motivate them to avail themselves of your distance learning program, including live and video classes. Perhaps we could even incorporate some videos into our program. Also, I want to use your academic standards for graduation as a model for our own. Overall, with your standards and our new academic requirements, I'm sure the weightier listen to him, he understands what will happen. He says, I'm sure the weightier demands will discourage some, but better to have Gideon's 300 than his 10,000. So, and then he makes this terrible statement. In addition, I would like to invite you and members of the faculty to participate in our visiting professor program. I'm not going to the other side of the world again. I've been there once. So, and he says, by teaching some live on-site class modules as well as preaching in area churches. So, well, since I'm not planning to go, I guess my assistant will have to be the one to go. So,
Or you're sending a lady at a time.
Well, I have already been invited to Kenya, so I suppose we could consolidate the trips.
They're only on opposite sides of the world, Rebecca.
Oh,
Oh, I don't know. But where has the teaching been? It's been superficial. Come on, let's go out and win souls. Let's go visitation. Let's go do this. Oh. And as somebody told me, this kind of thing, somebody said, well, that's the kind of thing that you teach in maybe on Wednesday nights when nobody's there, shall we say, but you don't put that stuff into a Sunday morning service.
why not?
Yeah, that's it. You see, the wisdom has departed. We say the glory has departed. Ikavod. The glory has departed. Where's the glory? Where's the value? It's gone. And we're doing Christianity. Just like that man said about, what was that, at Christmas? Said, said, yeah, we're going to be here. We're going to do church.
We're gonna do church.
We're going to do church. That's a pastor. We're going to do church. The heart is gone. The heart is gone. Anyway, Becca,
You ready?
would you turn off the recording so we can discuss things in a more civil fashion?